Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 29th, 2023, and this is the Senate Government Operations Committee, fresh off a very productive floor session where two of our bills passed on second reading. Congratulations, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, and our two reporters who are not here yet. So we are continuing our conversation on H 429, which is an act relating to miscellaneous changes to election law. There are many people who are interested in this bill for a variety of reasons. So we are going to hear from as many of them as we can. First up, we have Christine Sivert from the State Ethics Commission. Come on up, Christina. And Christina was with us earlier this session and made a few proposals to us, including the proposal regarding elections. So this bill is a potential vehicle, depending on what the committee thinks of the proposal and other testimony on it. So Christina asked to come and talk with us, and I think the language that you're proposing is posted on our website. So if people want to take a look at that, should be there today. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Christina.
Sure, yes, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back. So I know we initially had talked about financial disclosures related to candidate financial disclosures, as well as executive officer financial disclosures, and the potential for the Ethics Commission to come back next year with a report for the committee on municipal ethics framework. But today, just talking about candidate financial disclosures. And so I think I'll kind of start with the broad framework of ethics in Vermont. So I don't think it's a secret to anyone that Vermont is quite far behind the rest of the nation when it comes to governmental ethics. We're repeatedly ranked among the lowest states in terms of governmental ethics framework. So
hold on just a second, Christina. I'm sorry. The language specific that the actual, we have a paper copy of it, and then also it's under Tim Devlin's name.
But we have this because I sadly don't have my computer.
Okay, so there is the draft amendment is what is the language that Christina is talking about, but then she also has some written testimony. So okay, cool. Go ahead.
Yes. Correct. And I think the draft that's posted was not our draft, but it's very similar to the language that we originally proposed. So we actually have very few comments on the actual language. But I thought maybe I could just, review why we think this is important. So as many people know, Vermont is very far behind when it comes to the ethics, governmental ethics framework. Many other states got started in the 1970s. We only just got a non-binding code of ethics put in place last year. I know the discussion about the Ethics Commission and Code of Ethics and enforcement powers for the Ethics Commission started in 2017. And I think initially when the Ethics Commission was set up, the vision was that it would have, independent investigatory enforcement powers and to be a binding code of ethics. At this point in time, the place that we're in now is that we have a non-binding code of ethics that was recently enacted, which is definitely something to celebrate, but at the same time, we have a long way to go. And so,
well, if we do everything too fast, Christina, then we're out of business.
There's definitely too fast, and then there's also, too slow. So I think Vermont would like to, get out of the bottom of the path when it comes to governmental ethics. So, and I think if we compare ourselves to other New England states, we're consistently ranked in the bottom nationally, and our surrounding states are much, much higher than us, in the top half to the top 10. So the proposal here is relatively modest. It's just proposing a modest financial penalty for a candidate financial disclosure form, which is in itself a very modest form, compared to other states, including our neighboring states. We ask for a limited amount of information. We ask for necessary information, but again, it's a limited amount of information compared to other financial disclosure forms in other states. We are the only state of all 40 states who have required financial disclosures that does not have a penalty in place. So that is where we sit nationally on this issue.
48 have penalties?
Yes. 48 have require financial disclosures, and of those 48, Vermont is one of them. We're the only state without a penalty. Oh. So the penalty that we're proposing is actually, relatively modest, and I think this is in recognition of the fact that late filing and the non-filing of disclosures is often inadvertent, and so we're not seeking to punish people, but we are seeking to encourage people to comply with the law. Because right now, the way things are set up, it's really is a scheme that requires voluntary compliance, and this is not always successful. And so the essential elements of the bill that's being proposed, or the language that's being proposed, is that, following notice of delinquency, which will be sent by the Ethics Commission, the person filing, who's either late or hasn't filed, will have 5 working days from the date of notice to cure the delinquency, starting 6 working days from the date of notice if they haven't filed. And the filer should pay a $10 penalty for each day that disclosure remains delinquent. The total penalty imposed will not exceed $1,000. And the commission reduce or waive any financial penalty for good cause. For example, somebody files late because, due to illness, certainly we're not seeking to punish that person. We're just seeking to get that disclosure on file so that the public is able to review it. And I should also say, it's also to the candidate's benefit to post it, because one of the purposes of the financial disclosure so that, candidates or the person filing the form can, preview their own potential conflicts of interest in the future so that they can be aware of them, so that they don't have any pitfalls themselves inadvertently. And then there is a section that references an existing criminal statute relating to the filing of false claims. We've analyzed this and we believe this already applies to financial disclosures, but this would be a situation where a complaint could be made against a candidate if they intentionally do not disclose information or intentionally do not file because they want to defraud or submit false information because they're hiding something. This isn't a very unusual case. We can look at to other states that already have these penalties in place, and this is something that happens rarely, but it is a serious situation. You're really looking at intent here, and then it'd be referred to the Attorney General's office for investigation. And so that is the broad strokes of this language that's in front of us. And I'll say that the language that is in this, proposed draft is almost identical to the language that we submitted. So we appreciate that. And the language that we submitted, we did, send around for review and comment to multiple offices, including governor's office, the AG's office, the Secretary of State's office. And any comments and feedback that we received, we made changes to the bill in response to that. So our view is this is a fairly non-controversial bill that should have broad support. I'll say I did have the chance to meet with the Secretary of State's office this morning. They let me know that they didn't have any objections to anything, still, except for one point, which is a point that I've made here. So I'm not sure if everybody has this, but we have 2 comments. And so the first comment is a relatively minor comment, but in terms of the Secretary of State sharing information with the Ethics Commission on disclosures so that we can then follow up regarding penalties. There's language that currently says that the Secretary of State's office will forward a copy of disclosures made by candidates for state office, state senator, or state representative to the State Ethics Commission. And so this is something the Ethics Commission flagged independently, as did the Secretary of State's office, as something we would like to see removed because we believe that language is a bit specific and we need to have continuing conversations between our offices as to exactly how the handover of information would happen. And we think that the forwarding copies is a bit too specific, and it's something that we can work out kind of on the back end. So we would both be interested in seeing that language removed. Our second comment relates to the Attorney General's office shall notify the State Ethics Commission within 10 days after receipt of a complaint under the subchapter, and within 90 days after receipt of a complaint shall file a report to the executive director with the results of the investigation. And so our suggestion, and we had originally proposed these 90 days, would be to increase the amount of time to 90 days or another amount of time that's suggested by the Attorney General's office. And this comment comes out of a conversation that I had within the last 2 weeks with the Attorney General's office, because they felt 90 days was too short of amount of time.
Senator Watson.
Sorry, thank you. Where is the 90 days that you're referring to? In the
Section 2415 should be towards the end. So it's actually the last paragraph.
Okay. Oh, there we are. Okay, thank you.
Senator Watson, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just curious. I want to know what if we're the last state to have any penalty, I'd like to know what the penalties are for that chap in New York State from Long Island who I'd like to know what that penalty is and how well New York is doing on that.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good example, guys. I think when we're talking about, not filing or filing false information, the criminal penalties for that, that would be the type of situation, not knowing New York law, that we'd be thinking about when we're thinking about these last two sections, talking about complaints that we refer to the AG's office, just to explain, to give a good example of like what we're really looking at when we're talking about that. This isn't something that's meant to catch people who, inadvertently make a mistake. It's somebody who is acting with the intent to defraud.
And so just the follow-up to, if somebody, what's your investigative ability if somebody has misstated their finances, and what is your ability to actually in any kind of swift response to anything, and what would be the action that would be taken?
Yes, correct. And so I think you've highlighted the lack of authority that the Ethics Commission has.
Yeah.
So honestly, we could do nothing. So what we'd be doing in this situation is waiting for a complaint to be filed with us. We don't have the independent authority to file a complaint ourselves. So what we do in that situation is we would receive the complaint, we review it for sufficiency, just to make sure that, the allegation relates to something that we can forward, and that there's some kind of, basis. We don't investigate whether the basis of the complaint is, factually accurate or true. We just we do a review, but it's a very limited review. And then we refer it on to the AG's office.
And is there a reason that we don't include our federal offices in this? I mean, they are state candidates for federal office. Is there a reason we don't include them in here?
I will say that, honestly, I think we're looking at, I'm not sure if their required candidate disclosure falls into the same category. And so
Yeah, I'm
I
not
think,
either.
yeah.
That's why-
And so I think initially our proposed language related to anyone who's required to file the candidate disclosure
Okay.
form. And so this is broken out to be more specific, but
Okay, and this, just sadly, one more follow-up. What this doesn't address, sadly, is something that bugs all of us, which is our finance report.
Yes.
And one of the things I hope we'll take action on in our bill and add a section on is any kind of not penalty is too strong a word, but any kind of
Accountability.
yes, any kind of accountability. Then how do we hold candidates responsible for doing what we are all required to do, which is file a finance report when they are required by the Secretary of State? We right now have nothing in here in this bill that addresses that. So it's independent of this, but it is something I want to mark for something I'd like to make sure we take up.
Yeah, Senator White.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this to us. It's something
Yes.
that's important to
Oh,
me.
sorry, I forgot to say that.
No, I think that having her here today is a reflection of that as well. So, one of the questions I had is a question that is slightly specific to a situation, but I want to understand if you think that this would qualify as like defrauding or falsifying. We had a situation where someone was using campaign dollars through a nonprofit organization that they were attempting to purchase things for their nonprofit with campaign related funds. And I had spoken to JP Isabel about this when it happened, and it didn't seem like there was quite a way to understand if what they were doing was actually a violation. But if you had a financial disclosure where you were moving money from, let's say, multiple different places, campaign related, would that be considered like?
so that would be outside of the scope of this particular question. So we're really just talking about the candidate disclosure form, which is looking at sources of income. And so, yeah, it's a very short form. It asks about sources of income over $5,000 for yourself and your spouse, and what boards and commissions someone sits on. So it's actually a very limited form,
Okay.
but this question would be outside of the scope of what we're talking
Okay.
about.
So it would be if their employer, rather than like if they had a side nonprofit or something that they were.
I think we'd be looking at a situation where if they were receiving income and they didn't disclose the source and what the intent was in not disclosing the source. Is it because they felt that they wanted to, hide a conflict of interest? So that would be a situation where like somebody might file a complaint that would be referred to the Attorney General's office.
Is there any way that this could relate to people purchasing like stocks or bonds? If a candidate, I know that insider trading is obviously illegal, but does this include if someone were concealing information about, my only concern is if you have a 401k and you're not necessarily, you might know that your 401k potentially has investments in something that legislatively is somewhat relevant, whatever that is. If you did not put the information that is in your 401k, for example, would somehow that come back to bite you?
Right, and I think, you know, at the time of my head, there are two situations where this form would deal, you know, stocks generally speaking, so you have to disclose if you have 10% ownership in a
Okay.
company. So if you own, you know, 10% of the stocks in a company or more and then didn't disclose it, then that would be something that you would be required to put in the form. And
Okay.
what is your
So
intent
that's usually-
and not disclosing it? If you just, you know, didn't think about it, you didn't realize it was 10%, you know, you're probably not going to be, you know, in trouble if that's like genuinely what happened. You're looking at somebody who intentionally decided not to do it. Another situation where stocks might come into play is if you're receiving income, say dividend income that was over $5,000 a year, and then you didn't disclose it.
Right.
Okay,
That's, I think, where
so
the key.
this is less of the
Yeah,
small.
so the 401k funds are what we call index. funds.
Index.
I know, is it a de minimis amount of?
I didn't know if I should send you a note or not, but I like,
Allison
what is
saved
she
me on the
talking
floor.
about? And I was like,
Allison's
index
saved me on the
funds.
And yeah, so anyway, so it's rare that you would have like a huge chunk, and
Yeah.
they're much more like banded together little
Okay.
funds that, and that's more of a campaign finance, some of your other questions, and we will have testimony on
Okay.
campaign finance stuff. And to your point about the federal office, there are different federal laws that govern federal candidates, and sadly, we can't change the federal law. So we have a lot of witnesses
I know we
today,
do.
so, and I'm gonna try to keep us on time. We will have other people come in on this particular language.
Great, and may I ask also that we take up the reasons, and because it's within the scope of our work, that we can address some of the, and improve the reasons we're so at the bottom of the pack.
Oh, yes.
And so I would love to continue the work of the Ethics Commission in this committee and address, how we enforce our code of ethics that we have finally put into place, and all the issues that I think we are next on our list. So at some point, I'm hoping that
Yes.
we'll do that.
Yes. Thank you, Christina, and we will have you back for the other issues as well.
Okay, yes, thank you. I think we'd be very interested in discussing the executive office disclosure forms because, you know, it is the same form.
Okay.
And so they're required for the same reason as well as municipal ethics. So thank you.
Thank you.
Did a rocking job. Didn't
Yeah.
have time to send you those.
Good job to both of you. We talked about you before you.
Yeah, we were,
Yeah.
speaking,
Oh,
we were
sorry.
singing your praises pre your
Yeah.
arrival.
Well, I was ready for more ice cream on the floor, but that would have offended Bloomer.
It's special.
So,
I gotta just get water.
okay,
Does
go
anyone
for
else
it.
need
I'm
water?
gonna keep a tight ship today, so let's keep moving along here. We have Paul Burns, and specific to H2 429. I know you want to celebrate about the other bill,
I
but
do. Thank you. First, thanks
Yeah,
on a couple of
great.
bills. Thank you for the reporters, for the committee, for your leadership. Really appreciate that on the two bills that you successfully reported today. For the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIRG, Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I do want to recognize again, because I'm talking about campaign finance here, that a little bit of context and history. VPIRG has been around since 1972. We are a 501c4 nonprofit, and we created in 1975 Vermont Public Interest Research and Education Fund, which is 501c3 charitable organization. Several years ago, we made the decision to be involved in political campaigns, launching VPIRG Votes and VPIRG Votes Action Fund later, which is a coordinated political committee and an independent expenditure committee, respectively. I share this background just in order to have full disclosure before commenting on a bill that has to do with campaign finance. I think that's just important. We, as I think you all know, have been very much involved in issues of campaign finance and disclosure and other issues related to democracy for 5 decades here. So, and I've been doing it for a couple of decades. With that history in mind, I wanted to urge you all as a committee to think about H429, which is miscellaneous elections, a lot of different, somewhat unrelated pieces of this bill. I hope you will consider this as a vehicle or a possible vehicle to make further progress to improve the way we run elections. And as it relates to 429, there are parts that we support, there are parts we oppose, there are parts we have no position on. But given the limited time today, I did want to begin by just noting a large concept or section that I would encourage you to consider adding, and that is related to legislation that the Senate has passed several times before in recent years, having to do with the issue of corporate money in campaigns. VPIRG has long supported a prohibition on direct corporate contributions to candidates and political parties. Our strong preference is for political contributions to come from human beings. And the Vermont Senate, again, has passed this legislation several times, which the way the legislation has been framed is to require that any political contributions to parties or candidates come only from individuals, again, human beings, political committees, also known as political action committees, or political parties. And if you're not one of those three, under legislation passed by the Senate previously, you could not give. The primary result here is that corporations that give freely to political campaigns currently in Vermont would be prohibited from doing so directly under this kind of a law. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, 22 states completely prohibit corporate contributions to political campaigns today. The federal government has also done so for more than 100 years. As you know, Vermont treats corporations today the same way we treat human beings as it relates to whether and how they can give political contributions. But importantly, corporations are not human beings and should not be afforded the same opportunities to influence elections that people can. We believe that H 429 already contains a provision. We know that the 429 already contains a provision dealing with campaign finance. As such, a prohibition on corporate contributions would be both appropriate and germane. As noted, the idea is not new. Consider the words of President Teddy Roosevelt on this topic of corporate campaign contributions from his 1905 annual address to Congress, if I may quote briefly. All contributions by corporations to any political committee or for any political purpose should be forbidden by law. Directors should not be permitted to use stockholders' money for such purposes. And moreover, a prohibition of this kind would be, as far as it went, an effective method of stopping the evils aimed at in the Corrupt Practice Acts. Roosevelt's words were repeated in 1906, which led to the federal passage of the Tillman Act in 1907, which prohibited corporations from making monetary contributions to national political campaigns for the first time. So well over 100 years, this has been part of federal law. It is known that corporations have certain advantages over human beings. They have unlimited life, limited liability. These are matters of public policy that have been benefits that have been given to corporations in order to allow the marketplace to flourish. You know, intentionally, we want an economy to run by giving these entities those advantages over regular people who live and breathe and die. But it was never intended at that time that those advantages might be used to amass great wealth that could then be used to influence elections. So we believe that, and I've got testimony here, written testimony that goes through why we believe this is constitutional. As you know, the Supreme Court has taken a number of steps to limit what bodies like this can do in the area of campaign finance, but so far they have been fine, allowing these prohibitions on corporate contributions to stand. Does money really have a corrupting influence on political process? Here I urge you to consider the words of Governor Howard Dean, who in his 1997 inaugural address said, I quote, "Money does buy access, and we're kidding ourselves and Vermonters if we deny it," unquote. Some states, such as Connecticut, have endured terrible corruption scandals. One scandal there led to their governor, John Rowland, serving 2 prison terms on various corruption charges. It also led to that state's adoption of a public financing system for elections and a ban on corporate contributions. Connecticut also limits the number of PACs, political committees, that a corporation can establish, which is something else that you might also consider either in this legislation or future legislation. We do support the requirement that PACs carry the name of their corporate sponsor if they have one. This is a step toward transparency that would help to address the problem of money flowing to PACs rather than direct contributions to candidates, which I know is one of the things that you and your colleagues have already expressed interest in. As I said earlier, when we, VPIRG, created a PAC, we named it VPIRG Votes. And in this respect, it serves as a model of what this transparency requirement would look like. We created it. It should have our name. There should be no question about what's the corporate parent or connection to this PAC. We also believe that this would be a good time to look at how Vermont might improve our system of public financing. We have had a system of public financing in place for more than 20 years now. In fact, Vermont was the first state to have a person run and win for statewide office using public financing. That was Doug Racine for lieutenant governor back in 2000.
And no one since.
No one else has won since, correct, Senator. A few have used it, but none recently. And that is because the system right now is really hopelessly outdated and does need to be revised. And we believe it's a mistake to have a system like this kind of remain on the books when it is really not a viable, in most respects, a viable program for somebody to run. So get rid of it or fix it. We would encourage you to think about ways of fixing it. In the
Senator Clarkson. I have a bill for that. It's coming soon.
I would note that this committee has passed banning corporate contributions. I feel like several times.
Oh, wait, hold on, because Paul doesn't have a lot of time, so why doesn't he finish, and then Senator White has a question.
And the public
At
finance.
least 3 times, yes, you have passed this. There are studies that have been part of that legislation passed by the Senate before that would look at ways of improving public financing, including looking at Democracy Dollars, which is a program in Seattle. Oakland has recently adopted that. We've got lots more information I'd be happy to provide you with. Finally, in terms of possible additions to 429, we do support the concept of adding enforcement penalties for late filing or failure to file candidate disclosure forms that Chris was just speaking about from the Ethics Commission. And Senator Clarkson, we also agree with the concept of looking at administrative penalties or fines that could be done when there is a failure to report on campaign finance, required campaign finance filings as well. That could be power for the Secretary of State's office, though obviously that would require more consideration and obviously engagement with that office. With respect to 429, as it stands today, I will say there are some, as I mentioned, some provisions we support, some we don't. We do support the provisions of sections 6 through 8, allowing for the voluntary filing and collection of candidates' demographic information. We believe, and I know there's some interest and perhaps even controversy about this, but we believe it's an important way that Vermont can better track how we're doing as a state when it comes to having people in office who provide a fair representation of the state as a whole. We believe it's valuable to have various perspectives taking part in shaping policy at the state and local level. Collecting this data will allow us to better assess how we're doing, what improvements we might make. The fact that the data collection is voluntary should remove concerns about privacy, we hope. We also support a careful approach to electronic ballot returns in section 10. Here, we admittedly are trying to thread the needle between doing everything we can to encourage and facilitate voting for people who face specific challenges when voting, and protecting the integrity of the process as well. We've heard compelling interests of the disability rights community who want better processes to allow for full and independent participation in voting. Electronic returns could be helpful in this way, as it could for members of the military and others serving overseas. We know that the Director of Elections in the Secretary of State's office has investigated this issue and has confidence in the integrity of this system. We also know that there are highly reputable organizations you'll hear from who have concerns about this approach. We support a limited use of electronic ballot returns, would not support opening it up further at this time, and I think it bears a kind of a close watch moving forward should you decide to move forward with that legislation.
May I just ask a question on this? Yeah. Oh, I know we're
Yeah,
trying to.
let Paul finish, and then Senator White has the floor.
Finally, section 3 is the area that VPIRG opposes as written. That's related to campaign finance limits for statewide candidates. I want to note that this section is much improved from the way that it was initially filed in the House. We and others testified with our concerns there. It would allow a candidate for statewide office to give up to $60,000 to a political party. Currently, candidates are treated just as anyone else is. They could give no more than $10,000 to a political party. We believe $10,000 is a substantial amount of money, allowing for quite a lot of influence over a political party, and that we have not heard arguments that we believe are convincing or compelling that make us believe that raising that limit from $10,000 to $60,000 would be the right thing to do. We have not taken positions of other interesting provisions of the H429 as written. I'd be happy to come back and address those. We don't have strong feelings about those. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paul. We have time for a couple quick questions, but we will certainly have Paul back, I'm sure. Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about why the public financing system isn't viable. Is it because, so I believe that it's because it's such a low amount that you wouldn't be competitive. Is that what you're communicating?
Of course, the amounts were written in 1997. People typically, particularly for the governor's race, spend more than what they would be given in qualifying for public financing.
Exactly.
That's That's true. It's also, there are other challenges, however, including when you can start a campaign if you're running as a publicly financed candidate until mid-February, when other candidates who are privately financed have been out for a long time, perhaps gaining support, political support and otherwise. There are problems of how and where we raise the money for such a program. And I just think there are now better ways of going about it. This Democracy Dollars is an interesting one. We will provide you with more information about that Seattle uses. It's a way of, instead of just gathering a number of signatures and then be given a large check by the government, it's a way of involving and engaging more people in the process by giving them these vouchers, $25 a piece up to $100. You could give 4 $25 checks to whomever you want. And this allows people to participate in supporting a candidate financially who have never had the money to do that before. And once they start having some skin in the game, even if through these vouchers, they tend to vote more often as well. So it's a way of keeping them more involved in the whole political process. It has a lot of interesting benefits to it. Now, there are challenges, which is why we think, you know, we could look at a study and certainly look more at the communities. There's municipalities that are using it now. That's just one idea of it better. I think what is probably a better way to go.
That is really cool. I'm super into that.
I know you
I
are.
want more.
We discussed it a lot last time.
Okay. Senator question, do you have a quick question?
Nope, I'm gonna save it for next time I see
Okay.
Paul, because there's so much to discuss.
Yes, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for
Thanks,
that overview at this point and to be continued. Next up, we have Rick Hubbard.
Would you pass it around to me? One side, and if you do the same this way?
Yes, I can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. It's nice to meet you in person. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for the opportunity to testify. Excuse the mask.
We will, no, that's fine. We will actually introduce ourselves to you because you haven't been in our committee. The last 2 witnesses have been here. And so for anyone in the room who hasn't been with us, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I'm the chair of the committee of the Addison District.
Now I can put your voice together with the face.
Exactly.
Olivia Parker, committee assistant.
We met.
Senator Tanya Vilhomsky, I'm the vice chair of the committee and I represent the Chittenden Central District.
Hi.
Rebecca White, Windsor County District.
Hello.
Hello.
Bob North, Franklin County.
Hi.
Ann Watson, Washington District.
Nice to meet you.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Fair enough. So first, I want to add my thanks to Paul's about your work with S32. That it's really important right now that we support strengthening our democracy. I just want to comment on the mask. The reason I'm back in Vermont is, and wearing the mask as much as I can, is that my life partner of 31 years is today in the emergency room dealing with stage 4 breast cancer. I just left her and I'll go back. So I'm trying to minimize anything I carry back to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, please. Would you like us to put masks on? I mean, for God's sakes.
I'm going to try to just speak for, I was going to start this and give myself a timer. for 7 minutes, hopefully less than that now. And then I'm going to open it up for questions for 8 minutes. But you might ask why I'm motivated to appear before you. And I'm 81. And when you're 81 and you say, how many years do I have left? I don't know the number statistically, but it's small. And on my watch, I have watched our political system get increasingly less responsive, more divisive, and the policies. And I should back up and say, it's hard to say this because I'm mostly speaking nationally. I admit, we do a hell of a lot better job here in Vermont. But even though that's true, there are pressures that push back on us. And more importantly, we in the state have some control. We make the rules that run elections. And we can change some incentives nationally in ways that would benefit all of us and encourage those we elect in their actions to actually prioritize paying attention to the broad common interests of all of us. So you're stepping up. I appreciate that. I know that. If I had one message to leave you today, it's to think really, really big. The fixes, and there are many needed, I'm only going to talk to a couple, are so dire that unless the fixes equal the scope of the problem, we're going to make a little incremental problem, kick it down the road, and we're not going to fix the outcome. So think big and focus on the issues that will make the biggest impact. So in reforming our political system to better serve us all, there's only one thing in this bill that I would like to push back against. And it's because I think we should be having our political system bring us together, not divide us. It should serve all of us, not one party over or one faction over the other. And the provision that prohibits losing primary candidates from running in the general election, in my opinion, goes very much the wrong way. Because as you perhaps know, we have 35 to 40% of all voter eligible people in the country. And I've provided appendices to give you the details on all this, that are consider themselves independents. That's a bigger percentage than either political party. And the reason people run it when they're progs as Democrats is directly because of the incentives or disincentives that are set up in our system. As an independent candidate, nobody even talks about you, takes you seriously till after the primary, and you're almost 60% of the way to the general election. What is fair about that to the 40% of all Vermonters that are independent? And we really should move to fix it. That said, the other thing I think you have the opportunity to do is to broaden the scope of 429. And I urge you to broaden it as much as you're willing to do. There are two things that I'll pick on to talk about. And one of them you have a lot of control over, and that's the transition of how we run our primary system. I provided an appendix that explains why our primary system now is dividing us instead of bringing us together. And we could talk about it in Q&A if you want. But that's huge. If you turned it around and you move to an open primary and put all the candidates, including the independents, Republicans, Democrats, on one ballot, as is happening in states around the country now, but it's new. And then you allow 100% of all voters to vote on candidates. It changes incentives as to how you get elected. You cannot speak to the minority. The reason, and I gave you this as an example, that you cannot get a single Republican senator in America to vote for anything substantive on the issue of gun control and regulation is directly related to the incentives in our primary. 2/3 of all Americans think we have a second American right to bear arms, but we also comes with responsibilities, etc. And there can be sanctions when and if you don't exercise that correctly. And yet you cannot get a single Republican senator. The reason goes to the primary and the fact that in the primary election, out of all eligible voters, the percentage that will vote is an average of 10%. You don't get through the primary to the general election as a Republican senator unless you please them. Yet 2/3 of the people you're then going to represent, if you get elected in the primary, think the opposite way. It's a perfect example if you only had that as the issue of how our system divides us. And it isn't helping us, it's hurting us, so fix it. And the other thing you have control over, Paul mentioned, and it's the way we finance the process. As long as we set up and we have a competitive, capitalistic economy, it has not been balanced by our elected representatives in a way that makes it work broadly for all Americans, which is, I would say, the job of our representative, both at the state level and the federal level. We now have 40 to 60% of all Americans that work a full work week and with wages driven where they go and the cost of healthcare, et cetera, where it is. You work a full work week and you cannot be in control of your life. That percentage has not a dollar in savings in our country. It weakens our country. It creates huge anxiety and distrust. But if you change the system so that we had the way we finance it coming from 100% of all eligible voters, there it goes. Rick.
You're doing fine.
As Paul said, and I've given you links to that, it would think about how it would change incentives. Instead of trying to please those who give you the big bucks, it's a tiny fraction in tipping policy. You now have to please the issues of all 100% of us. I know it's dramatic, I know it's radical, but it goes back to, do we want to fix it or not? And with that, I will stop, urge you to read the appendices. I spell out how bad it is in one of them. And I'll open myself up to questions and do my best to answer.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Hogan. Are there any questions? You've given us a lot to think about. Senator Clarkson.
I want to know, have you walked already and I just missed it, or are you about to walk?
I started walking October 1st. I traversed the deserts of California, Nevada, and most of Arizona. Had events in Reno, or not Reno, excuse me, in Las Vegas and in Phoenix. And then my sweetie got in trouble. So I'm here.
Then it got
because
curtailed.
She needs me and I'm.
So you began in California?
And so the RV that you have a picture of at the bottom of the first page.
Oh, there you are.
Out north of Phoenix, and the run rate on the storage fee is going. And I did not terminate it, suspended it, but if you said when and how am I going to pick it back up again, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
And,
And thank you for doing it. So,
well, you don't do anything alone. It's just trying to support what you're doing, what people are doing in other states, activists, organizations that are trying to improve things.
I appreciate that you're asking us to think big.
Yeah.
One of the I think issues right now is timing. Over the last couple of years, we have asked our town clerks and our Secretary of State's office to make major changes in how people vote with mail-in voting and other provisions that were adopted during the pandemic. And one of the first things we got testimony on in this bill is that usually the miscellaneous elections bill is quite long, and it's intentionally short this year because I think everybody has gone through tons and tons of changes. So I'm wondering, with that in mind, knowing that we just passed a major elections bill or about to pass it tomorrow on third reading over to the House, and hopefully they will follow suit.
So do I.
Yeah. what would be your recommendations for maybe teeing things up, but not doing it? Because I think we would not get support for this bill if we did too much too fast. And we saw that with the ranked choice voting bill as well.
I understand that, I agree with it, and that's why I said expand the scope of what this bill can do and set up a committee that will head us down the right path. We cannot support changes unless we understand as citizens how bad it is, and that means people have to talk out about it more, including all people who represent us at all levels. How bad is it? What are the pressures? Why is it that if you step out of line, you don't get access to certain mailing lists if you don't pay the right money? How does that affect our voice in talking honestly about issues on behalf of people? And the other thing I'd say is that ask yourself this. We see the direction the country's going. If we study it too long, too hard, how much time do we have? I think it's that bad. There are active forces abroad, and there are very influential forces right now trying to use the very rights under our Constitution to undermine our representative democracy. I don't know how that plays out, but I sure have a preference. And I think I speak for an awful lot of people when I say that.
Thank you. Do you have a question, Senator White?
Thank you, Chair Hardy. Yes, I think that you have reignited my ongoing fear of fascism, which I try to tamp down throughout the day. And then sometimes it just flares up again. And your testimony was involved in that. I was actually very interested in what Senator Hardy was getting at, which is, are there incremental things, is kind of what I was hearing in her question, that you see that we could do. And I know that that's not what you're giving testimony on, but maybe that's not a question you can answer today, but I would love to hear an answer on that. Okay.
I honestly think that the smaller incremental things are going to move the needle.
Are or not?
Are not.
Are not, yes. Thank you.
And we're just going to suffer the consequences unless the changes add up to enough to change the behavior. And that's a big lift. I know that. But I also know we're running out of time.
Okay.
The one suggestion I'd make is that when we set up the public financing in Vermont, I think Vermont, in retrospect, made a big mistake by setting it up for only our statewide officers. What was much more effective happened in Maine, where they set it up on exactly the opposite.
Right.
Fund you guys, fund the reps, the senators. And it became broadly popular and supported across both party lines. And then there was support, enough support across both party lines. So they've moved and they've become a leader among states in fixing their system. Alaska, same thing.
Yeah.
I met with the folks in Las Vegas, Professor Sandra Cosgrove, who's pushing that initiative in their constitution and making progress. I think those are the kind of changes that can move the needle and that states control.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think you're spot on that, because we have a fiscal note on this. We did a lot of work on this in the last couple of years. And you're right, now the price tag is a challenge. But if we had begun bottom up, as in many things, I think we'd have made more progress.
I would make one last comment before I bow out, and that is, I think you all understand, but when you're on the floor and talking with your colleagues, I think it would be helpful if we reminded our colleagues of the oath that all of you take on behalf of us as the people, to basically address the biggest issues that face all of us, including our election system, and make it work for all of us. It's part of the oath, it's part of the Constitution, and when necessary, to reform our system to serve our common good, take action. Leadership is really important. So thanks for yours.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard.
Can I go?
Yes, and we wish you the best with your partner, and we hope that she recovers and finds peace.
It's just bad timing. I'm sorry.
No, go do what you need to do. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And hello.
Okay, Angelo Lynn, I think is on Zoom.
Thank you for letting me.
Hey, Angelo. Recovers and finds peace.
It's pretty bad.
You're gonna have to get off YouTube, off the YouTube feed today. You don't have the echo of me talking. Okay. Angelo Lynn, I think is on Zoom.
Hi,
Hey,
can you hear me?
yes,
Can you hear
can
me?
you
or-
turn off the mute?
It's pretty bad.
You're gonna have to get off the YouTube feed today. You don't have me talking.
Yeah.
Oh,
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? or-
It's pretty bad.
Hey, Angela. Olivia is messaging you. You need to get off the YouTube feed
I
and
need
just
to
stay
get
on.
off something.
Yeah,
Do I have to get off the live YouTube?
yeah, and just, okay,
no.
wrong thing. We'll get them back.
It's magical Zoom stuff. It's,
Yeah,
I'm actually impressed with how well people have done with it.
yeah, it's impressive that we've been able to function
Yeah.
for so long with it.
Change is hard, but when we get used to it, sometimes it's great.
Good stuff. And if we need
But
to.
incremental
is he
change.
coming back, or-
you.
It warms the back.
Sometimes there's not time and you just gotta rip off the Band-Aid.
I'm aware of that on a lot of issues.
Okay,
We're gonna be like Mark McDonald.
okay, if we can't get him back, we can skip it.
This is our future, like, we're just gonna.
I also know that today is deadline day, so, okay. Oh, no, I still hear myself.
Is that working?
Okay, yeah. No, you got it.
God damn it.
Oh.
Hello, does
might
that, can you see me?
We
No?
can see you and hear you. Can you? Yeah, okay, maybe this is good.
You got
Can you
me?
hear us?
Yeah.
I can
yeah.
hear you.
Okay, awesome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Angelo. Thank you
Sorry
for
about
being
that.
with us today. No, that's totally fine. That happens all the time. And have you testified with us before? I can't remember.
No.
No, okay, John Flowers did. So we'll introduce ourselves really quickly and then we'll let you take it away and tell us what you want us to hear. You know me, I'm Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Olivia Parker, committee assistant.
Tanya Vihovsky, Chipman Central.
Rebecca White, Windsor County District.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
Ann Watson, Washington District.
So that's us. And so why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us what you want us to know about H429.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Angelo Lynn, the editor and publisher of the Addison Independent. And I've been here for 38 years doing this. And this is one of those bills with a little bitty section in it that you start reading about and you think, oh my goodness, it might not be such a great idea. And that, and so, I start reading, you do all these reports and you read more about it. And so I thought I'd write it down and just share some of that information with you. And it's mainly on this section of the bill 429 that has to do with expansion of internet voting, and particularly the return of the ballots, of online ballots. And I would just say that from everything I can read, it just, the system invites a far greater risk than the reward. And to that point, I'd urge this committee and the legislature to adopt one overriding goal as you contemplate this part of the bill, expanding electronic voting, and that is to do no harm. make sure that what's approved is absolutely secure. Because if it's not 100% guaranteed, you risk undermining the integrity of the Vermont election system. And once the trust is lost, it's just difficult to rebuild it. So to understand, and as a newspaper guy, we're all, we're defensive of that system for sure. We don't want to see that trust lost. And to understand the risk, we just must first understand a little bit about the players. You currently contract with Vermont Democracy Live. It's a technology vendor that's already has a contract with Vermont. It's been distributing the digital ballots to voters with disabilities and military abroad, distant locations, and that system's been working well. But the language in this bill allows voters to return the completed ballot digitally over the internet, and that requires a much more complicated process in a system that's actually impossible to secure, according to numerous studies, including a 2020 report by 4 federal agencies. That's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the Election Assistance Commission, and the FBI. They wrote, quote, electronic ballot return faces significant security risks to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of voted ballots. These risks can ultimately affect the tabulation and results and can occur at scale. And here's another passage from a recent letter to Vermont legislators. I'm not sure if you received this, from a group of security experts that wrote, the internet voting, referring primarily to the electronic return of a marked ballot via email, fax, web-based portal, or mobile apps, is not a secure solution for voting in Vermont or elsewhere in any form, nor will it be in the foreseeable future. In April 2022, we wrote to every governor, secretary of state, and state election director across the country, detailing the scientific and technical risks, including these 4 points. All internet voting systems and technologies are currently inherently insecure. No technical evidence exists that any internet voting technology is safe or can be made so in the foreseeable future. Rather, all research performed to date demonstrates the opposite. So, hey, that's one part of the picture. The other part is just noting that the financial contract with Democracy Live would likely be more expensive with the added service, I'm assuming. And it's clear this contract is priced to generate a profit for the vendor. That's all well and good. I'm a capitalist as well. But to that end, when any vendor sells a complex product, it's prudent to acknowledge the Latin saying, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And because these are systems that have no oversight or government regulations, it's really on the committee and the legislature to determine if these products that you're buying are secure. And that's kind of a big task for, I think, any of us. But as I think furthermore, as testimony by the election expert Susan Greenhall, who I believe you've heard this morning, is that right? Or this afternoon?
She is in the room and testifying after you.
Okay. Well, she'll have more information to say about why online voting systems present even more unique problems because they're private, and once they're submitted, how do you track them? And it's a really difficult system. Now, I'm no cybersecurity expert, but in reading all these reports for the last several weeks, I have noticed a few things, and that is that all of the federal agency reports have reached the same conclusion, that it can't be done. And they actually tried. It was fascinating to me that they had an 8 years goal for a pilot project directed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And in 2015, they gave up and said it just couldn't be done. And that assessment hasn't changed. A few months ago, a working group convened by the University of California, Berkeley's Center for Security and Politics concluded after more than a year of research that that assessment hadn't changed. It could not write standards to secure electronic ballot returns. And I ask, why aren't these reports more front and center? You know, why? And there's actually a clear answer to that. That's federal agencies can't advocate for election reforms in state affairs. I guess it's a good wall of divisions that they can't, but they can provide studies. But the states themselves must take the initiative to read the studies and make their own decisions. So that's one side of the equation. On the other side, we have a private company that seeks to expand electronic voting with Vermont and other states across the nation, and it stands to make a lot of money. And what's disturbing about this to me is that they basically have said, trust us. You know, that's their security, is to say, trust us. You know, we'll do the right thing. And when pressed for evidence on several of their claims, Democracy Live and the reports that I've seen basically sell the fact that they have scientific sounding groups that have done studies, but they don't provide the answers. They don't provide written studies by any federal agencies. And it's, you know, read what you will into that. But they're asking the Vermont legislature to just trust us as the adequate answer, rather than written peer-reviewed studies that should be reviewed by committee members and scrutinized by federal agencies that specialize in these security issues, or universities like MIT. And I would think that Vermonters wouldn't expect anything less. So I also want to just say, I'm not here to criticize Democracy Live or its patron mobile voting or its billionaire founder, Bradley Truss, for seeking to provide a secure online voting system, because the ultimate goal is improving voter turnout. And it is a noble goal and idea. If it were possible to make voting easier and more convenient and get a higher percentage of Americans casting votes in every election, that would be awesome. And no doubt that ideal is what is driving this initiative in the legislature, and we applaud that effort. The 800-pound gorilla in the issue, however, is the lack of security. And because election results can be manipulated at scale if breached, it doesn't work if it's 95% secure. It has to be 100 or close to it. And make no mistake, this is the other new thing in the environment. There are bad actors out there, including foreign actors who want nothing more than to weaken our democracy. In contemplating such voting systems, we must consider that expert state actors will, for the foreseeable future, be trying to sow disruption and create a loss of faith in our democracy. California, Utah, Washington, D.C., and others have recently rejected online voting initiatives because of those concerns. Now, if Democracy Live were to offer a foolproof guarantee that its system was secure, that would be great, but they don't. A clause in their typical contract states that they can't be held for liable breaches of security. In Section 2 of a typical contract, this is one in California, in all caps, the contract says, Democracy Live does not represent or warrant that Secure Select and OmniBallot Online will operate error-free or interrupted, and that all program errors in Secure Select and OmniBallot Online can be found in order to be corrected. Nor does Democracy Live make any warranties regarding the accuracy, reliability, or currency of any information content. And I don't blame them. You know, the scientific community says it can't be done, and their contract kind of agrees with that. But their sales pitch sings a different tune. Time and again, they emphasize how secure the system is. And legislatures basically must determine if that's a siren song with ample verbal assurances, but no written proof. Again, I just urge the legislature to think of the phrase caveat emptor and be cautious. Knowing then that this committee and ultimately the legislature has to determine the security of the vendor's voting system, here are a few questions Vermonters will want to know. How many voters currently receive ballots via email, and how many have been returned by mail in previous elections? The goal of this question is to judge how effective the current system is. How many more voters would be reached under the proposed change? That is the expansion worth the risk? Under the language of this section, and I did talk to Matt Bjorn on this in the House Op Committee, and he didn't think the language allowed everybody that wanted to online or absentee ballot to be able to vote, but the language maybe should be tightened up. But even if it does, what's the greatest potential number that might be? And would that overwhelm the ability of town clerks to process those voters in the manner described? Also, what's the current monetary value of the contract with Vermont Live, and what would it be with an expanded contract? You might already know that. I'd be interested to know. What current voting processes do we have for our military forces and those with disabilities? And can the problems be solved in other ways with less risk to elections integrity? And finally, is this matter so pressing that it can't be shelved for a year until these questions are more fully explored? So I think some of these answers should be easy to ascertain. I'm eager to know the answers, and other questions are more complex. And I certainly appreciate the time and the careful consideration this committee is giving the bill. In conclusion, I would submit that the current risks outweigh the benefits, and that the online voting provision in this proposed bill be struck, leaving the current online voting process as is, or perhaps we might find the current process by extending the days to receive mail ballots from military personnel and from voters with disabilities, as I think was previously suggested by the vice chair of this committee. I'm also here just to sign off and say that as editor of the Addison Independent for the past 38 years, I sincerely appreciate every legislator's willingness to do this job, because you're always seeking to find solutions to countless problems and opportunities facing the state. And I understand how time-consuming each issue can be and how impossible it is to read every article written on both sides of every issue out there. I also fully realize that this tiny section of this bill that I've now spent 20 hours researching, which is ridiculous, right? And it simply seeks to make it easier for a few people to vote. Doesn't seem like a huge deal in the scale of what's important in the legislative session. I fully get that. But I would argue that it's more important than it may seem. That in most ways, it's a very small change, but it also poses a huge risk that could have enormous consequences. So again, I ask you to first, do no harm. Second, to heed the Latin saying caveat emptor. And third, here's a twist on a Reagan quip: never trust, always verify. That is especially true when dealing with the integrity of Vermont's elections. So in my written testimony, I've included some additional readings with excerpts and links, but I won't go into that. I think it's very interesting, but reporters always do. So thanks for your time and consideration. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Angelo. And did you send in your written testimony to Olivia? So it's on our website? Yes, yes, you did. Excellent. Does anyone have any questions? Senator Watson.
Thank you. I haven't checked your online testimony yet, but I just wanted to go back to the statement that you read a clause from Democracy Live's contract about basically they're not guaranteeing the privacy. What was that? Is that linked in your
Yes.
your online testimony?
Yeah, there's a link there to a contract that's from I think it's a county contract in California. There's a link right underneath that clause. That if you hit to, it'll take you right to what is a typical contract, I suppose. The ones I've seen.
Yeah.
And it just states in there in all caps, you know, as they probably should. Hey, we're not going to guarantee that this works, that it's secure. You know, if there are problems and it gets hacked in and voter results get changed, we're not liable. That's all that says. It makes sense. If you read the reports, it can't be secure, according to the FBI and everybody else out there. So they're just saying that they're not responsible for an election in case it gets hacked. I mean,
And thank
that's,
you.
yeah. And I don't think, as a business person, I'd probably write the same thing. These clauses are in there all the time. But it's, it's just not something that perhaps we would want in our election system.
And we are gonna have testimony from Democracy Live later, just in a little bit, so you can ask that
Okay.
directly, Senator.
Yeah.
Wilson.
Perfect. Okay.
Well, great, Angelo, thank you so much. We do need to move on to our next witness, because we're on a schedule, but I appreciate you joining us remotely, and good luck getting the paper out today.
Yeah, I just was reviewing the front page, so thank you very much.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that, we have Susan Greenlaw. Did I say that right? Greenlaw?
Greenhall.
Greenhall. Oh, there's an
Happens
H.
all the time.
I'm sorry. My brain saw just the L. Greenhall, thank you so much. And thanks for your persistence. I know you really wanted to talk to us, so I appreciate that. And you sent a number of things that are on our website.
Yeah.
So if senators want to look at those, that's great. And so why don't you just take it away and tell us what you want us to know?
Yeah, actually, and we apologize, there is a lot of research. Angela mentioned there's so much research. There's one other thing we do want to send you, and I'll get to that in a second. So thank you, Chair Hardy and Vice Chair Vahowski and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today on the electronic ballot return clause in 429. As an alumni of the University of Vermont, I am grateful to have the chance to visit this beautiful state that I used to call home. I serve as the Senior Advisor on Election Security at Free Speech for People, a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to defending our democracy and our Constitution. And I'm here on behalf of a coalition of pro-voter, pro-democracy groups that includes Common Cause and my colleague Liz Yacobucci, Public Citizen, and Verified Voting. We are committed to protecting access to the ballot for all voters as a core activity. And like all our coalition allies, our work is centered around education, advocacy, and legal actions aimed at protecting and expanding access to the ballot for all voters and opposing policies that restrict access. But this work isn't enough. The votes must be counted and the choices of the voters honored. The right to vote is meaningless if we can't be sure that those votes will count. And that's why our position on electronic ballot return is consistent with that of the Department of Homeland Security, which is to recommend paper ballot return. Cyber threats to elections remain intense. Representatives of both the FBI and Homeland Security were recently warned election administrators at their winter conference that our elections remain under attack and that these risks are amplified because of the Ukrainian conflict. Adopting electronic ballot return will indisputably increase Vermont's vulnerability to attacks and errors that could upend an election, not just a few votes. So we strongly oppose electronic ballot return because over the last 2 decades, multiple scientific studies in both public and private sectors have concluded it's just too vulnerable to undetectable manipulation and tampering. If electronic ballot return could be employed securely, our organizations would be lining up to endorse it. We want to improve voter access, but not when it's insecure and can't be trusted. So we know we've been talking about a lot of different studies, and we've been trying to send you a lot of different studies. So we're not just saying there's a lot of different studies. Here are all the studies. But there's one other thing that I wish you might be able to read, which there was an article that just posted since the committee convened from CyberScoop, which did an investigative report into Democracy Live, in that they have been trying to, in the grand tradition of the big tobacco and the big oil, by academic research to prove that their system is secure, to counter the scientific studies that have said this is not secure. It's a fascinating article. It says that they have purposely paid for research, edited the research from universities to try and counter what has been put out, saying that this cannot be secure. So we'll send you that article and hope you can take a look at it, because it's got a lot of information in it. We recognize that voters with disabilities and military and overseas voters face challenges to cast their ballots, and we support efforts to address these hurdles, and we'll discuss that. Just want to say, regardless of the name, electronic ballot return, online ballot return,
Ballot return via portal, internet voting is all the same thing. It's electronic transmission of the vote choices over the internet. And that's what all the research has studied, and that's what has been determined to be insecure. The most notable security study is the 2020 study from the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency that Angela referenced. And so everybody is the background. CISA is the agency within Department of Homeland Security that is responsible for securing our infrastructure, critical infrastructure, including election systems. They were very vocal defending the security of the 2020 election. The risk assessment was not just from CISA, but also from the FBI, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and U.S. Election Assistance Commission. That's not really common to have 4 federal agencies sign on to something like this, and we have copies for people in the committee if they'd like to see it. The study concluded that electronic ballot return is high risk, even if you put security controls in place. So that means that no matter what tools are there, what safeguards are there, that a vendor like Democracy Live or any others can use cloud, can use encryption, those security tools, it will still be high risk. So I know that the committee is looking at the balance between accessibility and security, but the bottom line is, even with everything in place, the risk is going to be high to the security, integrity, confidentiality, and availability of those ballots. And according to that assessment from CISA, they say this ultimately, CISA, again, DHS, could ultimately affect the tabulation and results and can occur at scale. This risk is not imaginary. Any consequential failure of an online ballot return system deployed in Australia denied likely tens of thousands of voters their right to vote on election day. And the agencies expressly recommend paper ballot return verified by the voter. So we would like to urge the committee to examine the conclusions, because CISA can't come here and lobby, as Angelo said. And also, but if you reach out to them, they can talk you through the risk assessment. So we would encourage that. Gonna kind of try and wrap up if I can to be quick. It has been represented that 429 is not actually internet voting, because the ballots are uploaded to a portal and to a cloud. And any suggestion that these ballots are not being transmitted over the internet is just misdirection. And furthermore, documents stored in the cloud are not unhackable, and attacks on the cloud infrastructure are on the rise currently and are more damaging. It's also important to understand that these vulnerabilities are not mitigated if a paper ballot is printed at the election office. Any cyber attack or manipulation of electronically transmitted ballots
You finish,
Okay.
and then we'll take questions.
would occur before the ballot reaches the election office for printing, so that the printed ballot will reflect the corrected votes, not the votes chosen by the attacker. And it's true that over 24 states currently allow electronic ballot return, but this should not be taken as evidence that it's secure or advisable. Most states passed laws to allow electronic ballot return during the 90s and early 2000s, at a time that the Department of Defense was actively developing a secure electronic ballot system that was going to be offered to military and overseas voters. The project was scrapped after it underwent a security review, which detailed the fundamental security problems. And after several years of studies and multiple reports, it was concluded that they could not develop a framework for a secure electronic ballot return system because of the problems. So in 2015, Congress repealed the project and it was abandoned, but it was during this time that all the states passed laws to allow electronic return. Instead of expanding it, we advocate that these states should repeal online voting. Trust and confidence in elections is currently under attack, and any state which permits ballots to be cast online could expose itself to doubt in election results. Under H 429, any voter that identifies himself as ill or injured may cast a ballot online, and this is not trivial. In 2020, election deniers had not yet latched on to online ballot return as a reason to cast doubt on election results, but this has changed. This is now a topic that is being discussed at election denier conferences. Vermont already has some of the most secure and well-run elections, and this is reflected in the fact that Vermont currently has one of the highest rates of return for military and overseas ballots, surpassing most states that permit electronic return. In 2020, 2,700 military and overseas ballots were returned and 30 were rejected. This could be improved by extending the deadline for military and overseas ballots, provided they are postmarked by election day, a proposal that has been previously offered by the vice chair. We therefore would like to recommend the committee consider substituting the electronic return provision in H 429 with a provision to extend the deadline for military and overseas ballots, recognizing that voters with disabilities still face challenges voting absentee. We would recommend including resources to provide alternative accessible absentee voting options that don't include electronic return. Thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony, and we welcome your questions and any opportunity to provide additional information.
Well done. Did you read, Jim? Senator White had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Did you do policy debate in college? I mean, that was straight out of a speech. Anyway, so my question pertains more to the bill.
Okay.
Which is, the way I'm reading it, this is a very small group of people who would be taking advantage of the electronic ballot provision. This would be a group of people who potentially are overseas, who are not able to be in person. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or perhaps just unable to be here, whether they're not in a foreign country. And what confuses me is this seems like you are making the case that we are making a dramatic change, and it doesn't feel as dramatic as I think that you're presenting it. So I'm trying to understand what number of people you think will be impacted by this.
So I think it's going to be higher than people think, because it's not just military and overseas. The military also includes anybody that's on base here in the United States, that they would qualify, as well as anybody that identifies themselves as ill or injured or disabled. And there's no requirement for what would constitute that qualification. So anybody could say, I am ill or injured, and then who's voting early absentee. So that means that, so it actually has potential to expand quite large. I would say that also that there's this misperception that only the ballots that are returned electronically by legitimate voters are the ones that could be at risk, because as you start to get a system like this online, the possibility to have some sort of automated script to request the opportunity to vote and say, yes, I am ill or injured and I want to return my ballot electronically, that's another possibility for corruption. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I think I just am not, I'm going to take a look at the reports, but it just doesn't feel that much more compelling to me than the risk that is inherent with taking a ballot to someone with two people, like a justice of the peace going to someone's home. I mean, I've done that.
Mhm.
And I think the drive with a paper ballot in bad weather, in a situation in which who are we to be verifying as two lay people? I mean, I think the idea that it being digital, being more inherently risky doesn't really resonate with me in the way you're presenting it, but I'm going to look at your research. So if we could just narrow down one specific thing that you kind of expanded on with your description of who would be affected by this. But how many people do you think will be affected by this? Like, what's a number of people who would electronically ballot that you think would be with this bill?
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm qualified to try and estimate how many people would suddenly, the thing is, once you put it online and people can now say, I want to vote early absentee online, and they have the opportunity to ask for the ballot electronically, and now they can mark it and return it electronically, a lot of people, I think, are going to do it. And
Like, I guess I'm trying to understand your argument. So how many, are we talking 500 people? Are we talking 50 people? Are we talking, like, how many people? I guess
The Secretary of State's office did give us some numbers last week about the number of people who are in the qualifying categories, and we can get that, those numbers again, and and then talk to them about the potential expansion with the qualification for, being ill or injured or whatever. But I think they know the overseas voters numbers.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
very,
military
it's like very low numbers. So I guess
160 to 170,000 online. U.S. military people out of the country. So.
in Vermont, from Vermont.
not in Vermont.
Country,
Yeah.
out of the country.
I was gonna say, that's a
Yeah, I
lot of
was like,
Vermont.
I understand what you're saying now, but I get, okay.
You got the border patrol agents, still a lot of people. out of Vermont.
But what is the exponential number? So once we get the numbers of how many, and I can review that, and I apologize, I did not
No,
catch
that's
that as relevant information for today. What is the multiple times or exponential rate? Like how many people of that number, that's a question, is how you think would be misusing this? Like what's above and beyond?
Would be misusing it?
Yeah, because that's what you're arguing.
I don't think any, well, I don't think that's what I'm arguing.
Like how many false, like.
I'm saying, how many ballots do you think could be corrupted?
Yes.
That could be open-ended, because if somebody wants to mess with your election, they could do a lot. And I would like to suggest, because I know you said that the way I'm describing it isn't resonating,
Yeah.
but the Association for Computing Machinery and the AAAS has sent a letter, and they have sign-ons from several computer scientists from Middlebury, University of Vermont, and Champlain College, and they've offered to come in and give a briefing. So maybe, because the problem is that when you have something digital, it can be manipulated by a bot, by some sort of script. That's how a hack works. It's
Yeah, I
not one
understand
individual
how.
person going in and casting one fraudulent ballot, another person casting another fraudulent ballot. They
Yeah.
set a system up and it just goes automatically. And that's why Department of Homeland Security says that these type of attacks can occur at scale, because there can be a lot of attacks and they can be, automated, and that's the real danger. So.
No, I understand that point.
Mm.
I think what makes me feel a little more confident in that is I think we do have very good cybersecurity that we could be putting in place. Like there's always an inherent risk with anything digital. I'll look into it, but I feel like what I heard from Digital Services and I know they don't do the election side of things, but even the conversations we've had in this committee around ways we can put in place security, I don't feel as concerned about it, but I will pause and I will not ask you any more questions, and I will do research.
If I could just respond to that one last point, I think one of the biggest concerns is that there's one thing if you're securing the committee, it's another thing when you're doing an election where there's so much, the consequences are tremendous, and the opportunity to redo or fix a problem are essentially none. So you kind of have to get it right the first time, and if you suffer some sort of catastrophic problem, it's going to be extremely disruptive, if not really, really bad.
So, I haven't read all the studies you sent us yet.
Again, just read the cybersecurity article, just read the article, then.
Okay.
That's enough.
But, and I understand that there's studies that show that there can be risks to using it, or, nothing is guaranteed. Are there examples of it, a hack happening that has been caught? And
Yeah.
how has that?
Yeah, so there was a hack on an automated absentee balloting system in Florida, where there was a script from, I think it was originating from Ukraine at the time, that was requesting repetitive absentee ballots to be sent. That was caught in 2013 or 2015, something like that. There was a hack on an online election in Hong Kong. And there was a problem with an election in Australia that I had mentioned in my testimony, where it wasn't a hack, but it was a catastrophic failure, and they actually had to rerun the election. People went to court because a lot of people who tried to vote were unable to vote because they had a problem with the system. It went down. This was not meant for everyone to vote online. It was just meant for a subsection of voters, but they waited until election day to vote. People who were disabled, they tried to use the system and they were unable to. And there were so many people that had tried to vote that were unable to vote that it exceeded the margin of victory, and several elections had to be rerun. The candidates were saying, we don't have the money to rerun our elections. We already threw them all into this one election. It was pretty bad, and we can send you links to those stories if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
But one of the problems with online, do you have to?
No, 2 minutes.
Okay, is that it is particularly vulnerable to undetectable hacking because it is a secret ballot, and that's why this problem is so unsolvable. It's not like banking online, because I'm casting my ballot online. I have no way of knowing that it's received the way that I voted it, and the election official has no way of knowing that that's how I voted. So that's part of what makes this problem so very difficult to resolve and why there's all these confusions. So short answer is that, you know, hopefully nothing has been hacked. But if you're smart, if you're a good hacker, like in an instance in Florida, it was actually the request for the absentee ballots were so repetitive and regular that they could identify that it was coming from a bot. But if you're a bad hacker, but if you're a good hacker, you're going to make the requests more random, and you're going to make them at the same time people get off work and when they're likely to be accessing them. You know, that's
Don't tell them.
believe me, I'm not telling them anything they don't know. So there's all right, let's stop there.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your testimony, and we have a lot to think about, obviously. And we have with us actually the CEO of Democracy Live right now. I think joining us, and if you, yeah, thank you.
And I hope I'll send you the article that just posted.
Brian Finney, hi, can you hear us?
I can hear you well. Good afternoon.
Excellent. I'm assuming you've been listening to the testimony, so is that true? So you've heard a little bit of the lead up to your testimony. Were you listening when we introduced ourselves? We can introduce ourselves to you again if you didn't hear it.
You know, I've been waiting in the lobby, and so I was not able to actually listen to the testimony.
I'm sorry. I assumed you were listening on YouTube because we're streaming on YouTube as well. So we will introduce ourselves and summarize a little bit of what we've heard, and then like for you to give your testimony, and then we'll certainly have questions. So I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I'm the chair of the committee.
Olivia Parker, committee assistant. Senator Tanya Vizinski, vice chair, and I want to apologize in advance if I have to get up and leave partly for your testimony. It's not because I don't want to hear from you, it's that I have another engagement that I have to be at. So I just wanted to give you that heads up.
No worries, yeah.
Senator Rebecca White, and I'm from the Windsor County District.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
And Watson, Washington District.
So we just heard from a couple witnesses some pretty serious concerns about the security of the Democracy Live system of ballot return, electronic ballot return. We have in the bill before us a provision that would allow it, and we're trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
So if you could talk about what the security is that your company uses to secure ballots. If you've had any issues, do you guarantee the security of your system? And then the cost of an additional, if we were to add this, if the state of Vermont were to add this onto the contract we already have, how much would that cost?
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Madam Chair and the entire committee. My name is Brian Finney. I'm the CEO and founder of Democracy Live, and I apologize for not listening in, but I can take a guess at some of the comments that were made shortly before my presentation here today. For background, Democracy Live, we are the largest provider of this remote cloud-based balloting technology designed primarily to help voters that have disabilities, voters that are serving abroad, living abroad around the world. We've been deployed in over 30 states across the country over the last 15 years, since 2008. Democracy Live technologies have been deployed in over 2,500 jurisdictions. We have voters in over 90 countries that have been using the system. We've been selected by the U.S. Department of Defense, by the U.S. State Department. We won the Accessibility and Voting Award presented at the United Nations. And all that is to show you and share with you that we have a great deal of background when it comes to this ballot transmission to serve underserved populations of voters. I know the technology being considered in H4 29 would potentially allow for the blind or the disabled community, or for voters that are serving or living abroad, to be able to not just access their ballot through this balloting portal, we call it OmniBallot, but to be able to either print the ballot in their location or to be able to electronically return the ballot. And my guess is that the speakers before me had some concerns around the electronic return of the ballot. Again, we've been deploying the ballot delivery in literally thousands of elections, I think probably 5,000 elections. As it relates to the electronic return, I probably don't need to elaborate as to why that technology exists and it has been existing now since 2019. Primarily, it's a security upgrade. Mostly fax machines and email attachments are being used by other states. I think 31 or 32 other states allow for electronic return of the ballot because they realize that if you are in a foxhole or you're in a submarine, or in our case is a space station, or if you're traveling, abroad, if you're a missionary in Africa, if you're a scientist in Antarctica, like we've had, or we have the military in overseas, they may not be able to have easy access to mailing a ballot back to the elections office, or even access to a fax machine or less secure email attachment. But certainly for voters that have a disability, for voters that are blind, who can't see the ballot, they can't hold a ballot, they can't hold a pen, right, because of Parkinson's or palsy or paralysis. They can't mark the conventional paper. This technology has been designed for them to be able to listen or access their ballot independently and privately without having to ask somebody to go vote for them. The technology exists. It's been deployed, at least for Democracy Live, and I'll speak for Democracy Live today. Since 2019, across 500 jurisdictions in hundreds of elections. It's never been a compromise. The site itself, the portal, we partner with AWS, Amazon Web Services. AWS has recently been selected by the National Security Agency. It's been approved for use at the Department of Defense and the CIA and the FBI, Homeland Security, and other federal agencies that are responsible for hosting and securing some of the nation's most critical and classified documents in this AWS cloud portal. In our case, that document happens to be a ballot. And the approach that we take, it's very similar in nature to DocuSign. You know how you go into DocuSign, you can interact with the document and you can print it out, or the mortgage company, as an example, right, could print it out. So that's more the approach that we're taking, that we are taking a document, hosting it in a federally approved cloud environment, again, approved by all those different levels of federal agencies, and the voter who wants to and is eligible can print off that ballot and mail it back in if they have access to the post office, right? But for those voters who are blind, as an example, they most likely don't have a printer. And so we're giving them the ballot and access to the ballot. As one voter contacted me, last November, and he's a Harvard trained attorney, he's blind, and he was excited about using our system. He was able to access the ballot. He called me up afterwards. He was all, he was a little bit frustrated because he was able to access the system, but in that state, it was required that he had a printer. And it became crystal clear to me about why we're doing this. When he said, Brian, I'm blind, why would I have a printer? So we all know there's a lot of reasons to do this, right? But there's no reason to do it if it's being done insecurely. So let me talk about the security of the system. Again, I mentioned that we partner with AWS, which again has tens of billions of transactions per hour. They have been approved by all those levels of federal agencies that I just mentioned, but importantly for Democracy Live and the OmniBallot application itself. OmniBallot is, and I've been in elections for 23 years, I'm pretty confident that this technology is the most reviewed and has the most ongoing security assessments and testing done of any elections technology, not of its kind, but any elections technology, period. And the reason why I say that is because this technology, this portal, has gone through the federally CISA, right? The Cybersecurity Information Security Agency, CISA, which is sort of the federal arm responsible for security under the elections at the federal level. So we have gone through a code and application review by CISA. We have ongoing security and vulnerability penetration testing by the Department of Homeland Security. This technology, the portal, has ongoing 365-day assessments by a pool of over 1,500 independent vetted cybersecurity researchers. Ongoing testing. And that's been going on for the last couple of years now. We have independent monitoring of the portal 24/7 by an independent cybersecurity firm to measure for any aberrant or nefarious activity, right? That possibly could be going on. That's independent verification that the portal is stable and secure. So the combination of drawing from a pool of over 1,500 cybersecurity researchers, ongoing testing, independent 24/7 monitoring of the portal, the reviews at the federal level, ongoing reviews by the Department of Homeland Security, and then we have multiple other states that have conducted their own security assessments. And by the way, each one of those assessments that I just shared with you are available to you all if you'd like to see it. Obviously, we don't put it in front of the New York Times, but they are available to you all, our customers, for your own reviews or those that are considering this technology. This technology has been deployed since 2019 in terms of the electronic return in hundreds of elections across 500 jurisdictions. Again, I go back to the fact that this quite possibly is the most reviewed technology and maybe the most secure technology in terms of ballot transmission. Ballot transmission is required by federal law. Electronic ballot transmission, I should say. It's a federal requirement to electronically deliver a ballot to our men and women serving abroad and living overseas and military voters. And then 31 other states allow for electronic return of the ballot, as I mentioned. But most of those states, many of those states are still using fax machines and email attachments, but they do it even though it's less secure because they realize we must enfranchise our men and women overseas. And now more and more states are realizing, I think we have 10 states now have deployed it for electronic return using this portal as a security upgrade over either email or fax, but also fully realizing, much like a federal judge realized in North Carolina, that you are absolutely disenfranchising and in violation. I'm not a lawyer, but this is just what the federal judge in North Carolina said, was that it's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act to continue to disenfranchise the blind and disabled. That the fact that they can't see or hold or mark a paper ballot, that they probably don't have printers. That means that they have to go down and buy a printer and figure out how to print, as a blind individual. The technology exists. Nothing is perfect. I'm out here in the state of Washington. We vote 100% vote by mail. I put my ballot in a mailbox. And God bless, but Milton the mailman, he'll pick up and then hopefully he's gonna get my ballot back to the elections office, right? So nothing has 100% security. All we can do is try to mitigate against the risk using the same types of federal reviews and ongoing testing that we're doing right now, while understanding that we have to find that balance and that it is no longer okay to continue to say that to a blind voter, to a voter who has a severe disability, that, you know what, we're not going to attempt to fully enfranchise you. Go buy a printer. 60 years ago, John F. Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon and replace him, and we're going to return him safely back to the planet, right? Here we are in 2023. The question is, can we take a document and send it to a voter and return that document safely back to the elections office from which it'll be printed? So I'll just conclude with this. Democracy Live is fully transparent. We want to provide you all those reports if you'd like to see them yourself. We want to engage with those that are opposed to this technology. We have attempted to engage with those that are opposed to this technology for a number of years now. We have actively and proactively reached out saying, if you oppose this technology, would you please look at it before you oppose it? Can you engage with us? We'll give you the code, we'll give you the application. Before you oppose it and continue to support the disenfranchisement of the most vulnerable populations in this country, would you take the time to look at the technology? Go hire your own cybersecurity firm. Not one person is opposing, not one organization who's opposing this technology has taken the time over the last 2 or 3 years that it's been deployed to actually review it, bring in their own cybersecurity team, and review the technology for themselves. My guess is, and I'm pretty sure this is the case, I don't think that they are hostile to democracy or they're hostile to voters with disabilities. I think that they are just underinformed about how the technology works. And we would welcome an engagement with those groups that have been opposing this technology to learn how it works. We can bring in the top level of security at AWS and explain why the National Security Agency selected them to host and secure some of the nation's most critical and classified documents. Let's engage, let's collaborate, let's communicate with each other. And at the end of the day, we can enfranchise the disenfranchised. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Finney. We would love to see those reports. We just received from a previous witness a bunch of reports, and we would like to take a look at yours as well. And has there been an outside security audit or analysis that you could also point to from of your system?
For sure. Again, we've been through the Cybersecurity Independent Security Agency. That's a full code review. We have this pool of over 1,500.
Is that available for us to look at, or is that?
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent.
Sure.
That would be great. And the other question is that you didn't get to was the cost. Is there an additional cost if we were to go from our current system to allowing electronic return of the ballots? Would that be an additional charge on the system?
Well, first, let me thank you and the state and the elections team, a fantastic elections team, by the way. It's been a great honor to be able to support the state of Vermont in providing accessible balloting today. You all use our portal for the ballot delivery of the solution, as well as in the polling places. So to be able to help and partner with the state of Vermont to be able to extend access to the ballot, it's been a great honor to work with you. To that end, you do have our application today. You have our portal today. And I believe it's an additional like $20,000 or something. I don't want to, I can't say for sure, but it's in that range if you turned on the electronic return.
Okay, there's no budget request with this bill, so it presumably the Secretary of State's office didn't think it was going to be that much money, but Senator White, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hardy. So the previous testimony that we received, one of the comments was that perhaps your company or the conglomerate of companies that do our elections and the technology behind it have spent money to create scientific research that says that the technology is safer than it is, vis-a-vis the way we saw big tobacco, fun studies that said cigarettes were healthy, that kind of thing. Could you comment on that?
Sure. It depends on who the scientist is, right? One of the things that we have, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we've had, to be quite honest, a heck of a time trying to get cybersecurity academics to independently review this technology. We reached out to dozens over the last couple, 3 years, and it turns out that people don't want to do a lot for free, right? So what does matter is who ends up doing the study. So as an example, we had a leading preeminent independent or a preeminent cybersecurity kind of leader from the University of Washington. I think now she's at Portland State. She did not get any compensation. I think we paid $5,000 to an administrator because they had a pool of students that were helping on the research. But the professor herself, she's a preeminent cybersecurity leader in the country who oversaw the review, and these students did most of the research. An administrator got maybe $5,000, but to disparage Senator Popofsky, who's a leading cybersecurity thought leader over the last 20 years, that she put anything on paper that was, that A, she didn't get paid for, and B, an administrator got $5,000 for I believe it does a disservice to the leadership that she, Professor Pavlovsky, has done over the years. So that's all I have to say about that. You know, we would be happy to engage with any academics, any independent cybersecurity people. I would like to see the system.
Okay.
Okay.
One of the things that we had talked about with Director Senning, who's our elections director, was having a demo of how it works. So we could actually, I think we all have visualized it maybe in our head, but maybe to see how it actually works. Is that possible to either give us the demo or send us something that we could demo it ourselves on our, like a dummy system that we could demo ourselves?
Yeah, I could do it right now if you wanted to. I could share the screen or.
Oh, sure, if you can, Olivia can give you the ability to share your screen. Hey, Bob, do you need?
Oh, I gotta go. Yeah, I'll be
No.
right back. No.
Oh,
But if we don't have quorum, okay, I'm sorry, we can't do it right now because we just lost quorum. So we're not allowed to meet. So we're gonna have to say goodbye to you now, unfortunately, and we will continue this conversation and maybe set up another time for a demo with you if you're willing to come back.
Anytime. In fact, I'd love to go out there and do one in person and get out of rainy, soggy Seattle here. So.
You can come to mud season in Vermont.
Season, I believe.
So thank you, Mr. Finney, for your time today, and we'll be in touch again.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right.
The door is open.